The Wyoming mountains hold secrets darker than winter nights and deeper than snow-covered graves. When former Army scout Jake Brown finds a dying Apache woman who whispers his name in her native tongue, he discovers that salvation and damnation often wear the same face. This woman didn't stumble into his life by accident. She came seeking him. But why like and subscribe to uncover this epic tale of forbidden love, sacred debts, and the price of redemption on the frozen frontier? Former Army scout saves Apache woman who came to repay sacred blood debt in Gold Map. The wind carried death across the Wyoming ridge like a hungry spirit searching for souls to claim. Jake Brown pulled his wool coat tighter as he checked the last trap line of the day, his breath forming white clouds that vanished into the gray afternoon sky. 12-year-old Tommy struggled through the knee-deep snow behind him, his young legs working twice as hard to follow the path Jake's boots carved through the wilderness. "Uncle Jake," Tommy called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Storm's getting worse. Shouldn't we head back?" Jake paused, scanning the horizon with eyes that had learned to read weather patterns during his years tracking through hostile territory. The clouds rolled in like dark cavalry, heavy with the promise of a blizzard that would trap them for days if they didn't move quickly. "One more ridge," Jake said, adjusting the bundle of steel traps on his shoulder. "Then we turn back." Tommy nodded, though Jake could see the exhaustion in the boy's brown eyes. The kid had been living with him for 10 months now, ever since cholera swept through the settlement and took both his parents within a week. Jake's brother Samuel had been his closest friend, the only man who'd looked him in the eye without judgment after he'd walked away from the Army. When word reached Jake about Samuel and his wife succumbing to the fever, he had ridden 3 days through dangerous territory to bring Tommy home. Home. The word still felt strange after 5 years of living like a ghost in these mountains. But maybe that's what the boy needed. Someone trying to build a home rather than just survive. They crested the ridge as the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Jake's trained eye immediately spotted something wrong in the landscape below. Near the frozen creek bed, a dark shape lay motionless against a fallen log. Too large for an animal, too still for something living. But as they approached, Jake felt ice form in his veins that had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. A woman lay crumpled in the snow, her deer hide dress decorated with traditional Apache beadwork. Her long black hair was matted with ice, her bronze skin pale with hypothermia. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, though it was hard to tell with death so clearly stalking her. Jake should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around and pretend he'd never seen her. Apache, the people he'd once hunted for the Army, the faces that haunted his worst nightmares. 5 years ago, he would have left her to die and called it justice. But 5 years ago, he hadn't been responsible for a boy who watched his every move, learning what kind of man Jake chose to be. "Holy!" Tommy caught himself before finishing the curse. "Is she alive?" Jake knelt and checked her pulse. Weak, but present. Barely. As he lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Dark brown, clouded with pain, but startlingly alert. She looked directly at him, and her cracked lips moved in a whisper so soft he almost missed it. She. Jake Brown. The words hit him like a physical blow. She knew his name. She knew his name in Apache. "What did she say?" Tommy asked, his young face creased with worry. Jake stared at the woman in his arms, his mind racing. She said my name. How does she know you?" Before Jake could answer, the woman's eyes closed again, but her breathing steadied slightly. Whatever strength she'd used to speak his name had cost her, but it had also seemed to calm her, as if finding him had been her purpose. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow just as Jake's strength began to flag. He'd built it 5 years ago with his sister Elizabeth's help, choosing this remote location specifically because it meant he wouldn't have to see other people unless he chose to. The structure was solid. Pine logs chinked with clay and moss, a stone chimney that drew well, and a roof steep enough to shed the heaviest snow. Jake kicked the door open and went straight to Elizabeth's old bed. He laid the woman down as gently as he could, then began the methodical work of treating severe hypothermia. Strip away wet clothing, replace with dry, warm slowly but steadily. "Get the fire going strong," he told Tommy, "then put water on to heat, lukewarm, not hot." As Tommy hurried to obey, Jake worked with the efficiency of someone who treated frostbite and exposure during winter's campaigns. The woman's fingers were stiff and discolored, but when he pressed on the nail beds, they returned to color. Not too late for her extremities, her dress was torn badly across the shoulder, revealing deep bruising that spoke of recent violence. Someone had struck her and struck her hard. Jake's jaw tightened as he recognized the signs. He'd seen enough violence against women during his army days to know what this meant. But it was when he was checking her possessions for anything that might help identify her that Jake found the item that changed everything. Sewn into a hidden pocket of her dress was a piece of worn buckskin, folded small. When he unfolded it, his breath caught. It was a map, hand-drawn with incredible detail, showing mountain passes, water sources, and landmarks throughout the territory. But at the center, marked with traditional Apache symbols, was something that made Jake's blood run cold. A location marked with symbols that even a former scout would recognize. Sacred gold. This woman wasn't just a runaway from the reservation. She was carrying something that men would kill for. Uncle Jake, Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. You look like you've seen a ghost. Jake quickly refolded the map and tucked it into his own pocket. Just tired. How's that water coming? But his mind was racing. If this woman had this map, others would be looking for it. The kind of people who didn't ask polite questions. The kind who left bruises on unconscious women and didn't care if they lived or died as long as they got what they wanted. The woman stirred as the cabin warmed. Her eyes opened again, darker now, more focused. She tried to sit up, gasping as movement brought awareness of her injuries. Her hands immediately went to the blankets, pulling them up to cover herself, her eyes scanning the room with the rapid assessment of someone expecting danger. When her gaze landed on Jake, she didn't show fear. Instead, something like relief flickered across her face. "You are Jake Brown," she said, her English accented but clear. "Brother to Elizabeth Brown. Former Army Scout, 3rd Cavalry." Jake felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "How do you know that?" "Because I have been looking for you for 2 years." Tommy approached with a cup of warm water, his young face full of curiosity. "Ma'am, Uncle Jake saved you from the snow." She accepted the cup with shaking hands, drinking in small, careful sips. When she finished, she studied Tommy for a moment before speaking. "You have kind eyes, young one, like your uncle had when he was a soldier." "You knew Uncle Jake when he was in the army?" Tommy asked, settling cross-legged on the floor with the eager attention of youth. "Not new," she said carefully, "but our paths crossed once, a long time ago." Jake felt ice forming in his chest. "What's your name?" "I am Ayanna Stormwind, and I have come to repay a debt." "What debt?" Instead of answering immediately, she reached into her dress and pulled out something that made Jake's hands shake. A small carved piece of bone shaped like a bear claw and decorated with blue beads. He recognized it instantly. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "From my grandfather, Running Bear. Do you remember him?" The name hit Jake like a rifle shot. Running Bear. The Apache elder who had been shot during the raid on Copper Canyon 7 years ago. The old man Jake had found bleeding to death behind the rocks while his commanding officer shouted orders to finish off the wounded. Jake had made a choice that day. Instead of following orders, he'd used his own medical supplies to stop the bleeding, then helped the old man escape into the rocks while the other soldiers were distracted. He'd never told anyone what he'd done, had tried to forget it himself. "He was your grandfather." "Yes, and because you saved his life, my family owes you a life debt. I have come to repay it." Tommy looked between them with wide eyes. "What's a life debt?" Ayanna turned to the boy with gentle patience. "Among my people, when someone saves a life, the person saved and their family owes something in return. Not money or goods, but service, protection, whatever is needed when the time comes." "But that was 7 years ago," Jake said. "Why now?" Ayanna's expression darkened. "Because now you need protection, and because the man who killed your sister has turned his attention to you." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. "Elizabeth died of fever 2 winters ago. Elizabeth Brown was murdered," Ayanna said gently but firmly, "by Agent Morrison. She knew too much about his corruption, about his plans to steal Apache gold and sell it for personal profit." Jake sank into his chair, feeling like the world was crumbling around him. "That's impossible. I was there when she died. I saw the fever take her. Fever caused by poison in her medicine. Morrison's men replaced her real medication with something that mimicked wasting sickness. Your sister discovered this before she died. She left records. Ayanna reached into her dress again and pulled out a leather-bound journal that Jake recognized immediately. Elizabeth's careful handwriting filled every page. She gave this to one of my people before she died. Asked us to keep it safe until someone could use it to bring Morrison to justice. She said if anything happened to her, we should find her brother, the man who once showed mercy to an Apache grandfather. Jake took the journal with shaking hands. Page after page of Elizabeth's meticulous documentation. Morrison's embezzlement schemes. His deals with corrupt territorial officials. His plan to claim Apache sacred lands, contain gold deposits, and sell mining rights to Eastern investors. And on the last page in Elizabeth's increasingly weak handwriting, if something happens to me, Morrison did it. Jake, I'm sorry I never told you about the work I was doing. I thought I could handle it alone. Trust Ayanna Stormwind. She carries grandfather's a blessing. Why didn't you bring this to the territorial marshal? Jake asked, his voice rough with grief and rage. Because Marshal Davis is honest, but Morrison has friends in the territorial government. We needed to wait for the right time when Morrison felt secure enough to make mistakes. And now is that time, Mom. Now is when Morrison learns about you, about what you know, about what you might have inherited from Elizabeth. She gestured to the journal. He will come for you soon. Today, tomorrow, but soon. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses cut through the wind. Jake was at the window with his rifle before the first rider came into view. 3 men riding slowly, calling out as they approached through the snow. Jake Brown, Territorial Agent Morrison. I need to speak with you about your sister's belongings. Jake looked at Ayanna, who had gone pale. Is that him? Yes, and if he finds me here. Tommy Whitton, Jake said quietly. Back room, now, stay there until I tell you different. The boy nodded and disappeared through the cabin's rear door. Jake turned to Ayanna. Can you handle a rifle? Better than most men. He handed her Elizabeth's Winchester. Then help me protect what your grandfather would have wanted protected. Agent Morrison dismounted outside a thin man in his 40s with cold eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. Behind him rode 2 hard-faced men who looked more like hired guns than federal agents. Mr. Brown, Morrison called, approaching the cabin. I'm investigating some irregularities in your sister's personal effects. I need to search her belongings. Jake opened the door but didn't invite them in. What kind of irregularities? Missing federal property, documents that may have been taken from government offices. Your sister was suspected of stealing sensitive information before her death. Elizabeth was a school teacher and a healer. She had no access to government documents. Morrison's smile was cold. Nevertheless, I have a territorial warrant to search these premises. You can cooperate, or I can have my men assist me. Jake saw the exact moment when Morrison's gaze found Ayanna sitting quietly by the fire. The agent's expression shifted from bureaucratic annoyance to something much more dangerous. Well, what do we have here? Morrison stepped into the cabin without invitation, his men following. An Apache woman off reservation land. That's a federal crime, Mr. Brown. She's under my protection, Jake said evenly. Protection. Morrison laughed. From what authority? Jake felt Ayanna's hand slip into his warm and steady. The authority of marriage. The cabin fell silent except for the whisper of wind against the shutters. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Marriage. Ayanna and I were married yesterday. Jake continued, praying his memory of territorial law was correct. Apache ceremony witnessed by my nephew. That makes her my wife under territorial common law. This is convenient timing, one of Morrison's men said suspiciously. Love doesn't follow convenient timing, Ayanna said quietly, her voice carrying absolute conviction. Jake Brown chose to honor me as his wife, and I chose to honor him as my husband. Morrison studied them both with calculating eyes. Even if this marriage were legitimate, it doesn't change my authority to search for stolen federal property. Then search, Jake said, but you'll do it respectfully in the presence of my wife. What followed was the longest hour of Jake's life. Morrison and his men went through Elizabeth's belongings methodically, looking for something specific, though Jake couldn't tell what. They found nothing, mainly because Ayanna had hidden the real evidence where they'd never think to look. Finally, Morrison gave up. This isn't over, Brown. If I find out you're harboring stolen government property or fugitive Indians, I'll be back with enough men to search this entire mountain." After they left, Jake sank into his chair emotionally drained. "Is it true?" Tommy asked, emerging from the back room. "Are you and Ayana really married?" Jake looked at Ayana, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "In the eyes of the law," Jake said carefully, "the question is whether it means anything more than legal protection." Ayana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My grandfather taught me that sometimes the spirits arrange things that seem like coincidence but are really destiny. A man saves an old Apache's life. Years later, the old man's granddaughter saves the man's life in return. Perhaps that is coincidence, or perhaps it is the beginning of something greater." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I came here to repay a debt, but perhaps I was also meant to find something McWest not know I was looking for." Jake felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe, or recognition that he was no longer alone in the world. "What happens now?" Tommy asked. "Now we prepare," Ayana said. "Morrison will be back. When he returns, it won't be with a search warrant. It will be with violence, but this time we will be ready." Jake looked at her, his wife, he realized with wonder, and felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he had something to fight for. Someone to protect. A family to defend. "Together then," he said. "Together," she agreed. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, three people began preparing for a battle that would determine not just their survival, but whether justice could triumph over corruption in a territory where the law was often just another word for power. The scout's past had found him, but perhaps in the eyes of a woman who traveled 2 years to repay a sacred debt, he might also find his future. Dawn broke gray and threatening over the Wyoming ridge, revealing a world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Jake stood at the window studying the landscape with the tactical eye of a former scout, while Ayana taught Tommy how to properly maintain their rifles. "Remember," she was saying, her voice patient despite the urgency of their situation. "A weapon you cannot clean is worse than no weapon at all. It gives you false confidence when you should be planning escape routes." "How do you know so much about guns?" Tommy asked, his young hands working carefully to reassemble the rifle's loading mechanism. "My grandfather taught me," he said, understanding the white man's weapons was necessary for survival. "But more than that, understanding helps you see that weapons are just tools. The real fight is here." She tapped her temple. "And here." She placed her hand over her heart. Jake turned from the window, struck again by the woman's wisdom. "Your grandfather sounds like he was a remarkable man." He was. He also said that understanding your enemy's heart was more important than understanding their weapons, because sometimes understanding reveals that the person is not truly your enemy at all. Their eyes met across the cabin, and Jake felt the same electric connection that had been building between them since the night before. The marriage might have started as legal protection, but something real was growing between them. "Riders coming," Tommy said quietly, peering through a gap in the shutters. "Two men, but they're not coming fast like they're attacking." Jake moved to the window and relaxed slightly when he recognized one of the approaching figures. "Marshal Davis, I don't know the other one." The territorial marshal was a fair man in his 50s, with tired eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much of human nature's darker side but still believed in doing right. The man riding with him was younger, maybe 30, with the careful posture of someone accustomed to violence, but not comfortable with it. "Jake Brown," Davis called as he dismounted. "Mind if we come in? Got some questions, need answering." Jake stepped aside, keeping his rifle visible but not threatening. "Coffee's hot, Marshal." Davis entered, stomping snow from his boots. His eyes swept the cabin professionally, noting the defensive preparations, the extra weapons, the signs that more than two people were living here. When he saw Ayana, his expression remained neutral. "Ma'am," he said respectfully. "Marshal," Ayana replied with equal courtesy. The younger man entered behind Davis, and Jake immediately recognized him as someone dangerous despite his relaxed demeanor. There was something about the way he moved, the way his eyes tracked potential threats. "This is Deputy Marshal Cole," Davis said. "Federal appointment. He's investigating some irregularities in Agent Morrison's activities." Jake felt a spark of hope. What kind of irregularities? The kind that get federal agents investigated by other federal agents. Cole said with a slight smile. I understand you might have some information relevant to our inquiry. Ayanna stepped forward. What do you know about Agent Morrison? More than he'd like, Cole admitted. We've been tracking his activities for 6 months. Financial irregularities, unauthorized dealings with mining concerns, suspicious deaths of people who opposed his policies. But we need solid evidence to build a case. Jake and Ayanna exchanged a look. This might be the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Deputy Marshal, Ayanna said carefully, what would you say if I told you we had written documentation of Morrison's crimes records kept by someone he had murdered? Cole's eyes sharpened. I'd say that could be very valuable evidence, if it could be authenticated. Jake retrieved Elizabeth's journal from its hiding place and handed it to Cole. This belonged to my sister. She documented everything before Morrison had her killed. Cole spent several minutes reading through the journal, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up. This is detailed enough to support conspiracy charges, embezzlement, possibly murder. But I'll need corroborating evidence to make it stick in federal court. What kind of corroborating evidence? Ayanna asked. Witnesses, physical proof, something that ties Morrison directly to specific crimes documented here. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. There is something else, but it puts my people at risk. She pulled out the sacred map, unfolding it carefully on the table. Cole whistled low at the incredible detail. What is this? A map to sacred Apache lands. Lands that contain gold, deposits our ancestors hid from conquistadors centuries ago. Morrison learned about it and has been trying to claim the land through federal seizure laws. How much gold are we talking about? Enough to make a man rich for life, Jake said. And enough to make him kill anyone who stands in his way. Cole studied the map intently. This could definitely motivate the crimes described in your sister's journal. But how do we prove Morrison knows about it? Because he's been hunting me for it, Ayanna said. 3 weeks ago, his men attacked our camp. They killed 3 warriors and took women and children back to the reservation as punishment for hiding the map's existence. You have witnesses to this attack. If any of them are still alive, Morrison doesn't leave loose ends. Marshal Davis had been quiet through this exchange, but now he spoke up. Deputy, if Morrison is planning something bigger, he'll need to move soon. The territorial governor is due for inspection tours next month. Morrison won't want federal oversight while he's in the middle of whatever he's planning. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of multiple horses approaching made everyone freeze. Jake moved to the window and felt his blood chill. Morrison was back, but this time he wasn't alone. 8 men rode with him, all armed, all with the hard look of professional killers. Marshal Davis, Morrison called out as he dismounted. Perfect timing. I'm executing a federal warrant for the arrest of a fugitive Apache woman and the recovery of stolen government property. Jake saw Cole quickly hide the journal and map under some other papers, but there was no disguising Ayanna's presence. Davis stepped outside to meet Morrison, his hand resting casually on his gun. Agent Morrison, this is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you back so soon? Federal business, Marshal. The woman in that cabin is wanted for murder and theft of government property. I have jurisdiction. What murder? Cole asked, stepping outside as well. Morrison's eyes narrowed when he saw Cole. And you are Satchel. Deputy Marshal Cole, Federal Investigations Unit. I'm curious about these charges you're filing. The woman killed a federal agent during her escape from San Carlos Reservation. She also stole classified documents related to territorial security. Interesting, Cole said mildly, because according to the reports I've seen, no federal agents have been reported killed in Apache territory in the past month. And I'd be very interested to see these classified documents you are concerned about. Morrison's jaw tightened. He clearly hadn't expected to run into federal oversight. The documents in question contain sensitive information about mineral surveys on government land, information that could be valuable to foreign mining interests. Then you'll want to handle this through proper channels, Cole replied. File your complaint with the Federal Prosecutor's Office. Provide evidence of the alleged crimes. Follow standard procedures. I don't need to follow procedures with savages who murder federal agents. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cole's expression went cold and professional. Agent Morrison, you've just made several claims that I'll need to see documented. Murder charges require bodies and witnesses. Theft charges require proof of what was stolen and from where. Do you have this documentation? Morrison was clearly frustrated by Cole's calm professionalism. The documentation is classified. I don't have to share it with territorial marshals. You do have to share it with federal deputy marshals investigating corruption in territorial administration, Cole said pleasantly, which is what I'm doing here. Jake watched this exchange with growing hope. Cole was backing Morrison into a legal corner, forcing him to either produce evidence he didn't have or admit his charges were fabricated. But Morrison was too clever to be trapped so easily. Very well, Morrison said with a thin smile. I'll file the proper paperwork, but in the meantime, I'm placing this property under federal observation. My men will be camping nearby to ensure no evidence is destroyed while we wait for the paperwork to process. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Morrison couldn't legally arrest Ayanna without proper documentation, but he could make it impossible for them to leave while he figured out his next move. That seems reasonable, Cole said. Of course, I'll need to file my own report about this investigation. Federal oversight takes a dim view of agents who can't properly document their activities. After Morrison and his men withdrew to set up camp at the edge of rifle range, the 4 people in the cabin held a war council. He can't hold this position indefinitely, Davis said, but he can make our lives hell while he's trying. The question is what he's really after, Cole added. If it's just the woman, there are easier ways to handle it. If it's something bigger, it's the map, Ayanna said quietly, and the journal. He knows we have evidence that could destroy him. He can't let us live to test him. Then we need to change the game, Jake said. Instead of defending, we go on the offensive. What do you mean? Jake looked at Ayanna, then at the federal deputy marshal who represented their best hope for justice. We give Morrison what he wants, but we do it on our terms. That evening, as snow began falling again, Jake sat with Ayanna by the fire while Tommy slept in the back room. They'd spent the day planning, but now, in the quiet intimacy of lamplight and crackling logs, other thoughts demanded attention. Jake, Ayanna said softly, what happens after this is over? When Morrison is dealt with, when the danger has passed? I don't know, he admitted. A week ago, my biggest concern was whether we had enough firewood for the winter. Now I'm married to a woman I barely know, planning to fight a corrupt federal agent and trying to figure out what kind of man I want to be. What kind of man do you want to be? Jake was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. I want to be the kind of man who doesn't run from his responsibilities, who protects the people he cares about, who makes decisions based on what's right instead of what's easy. And do you care about me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and risk. Yes, Jake said simply. I know that might seem impossible after such a short time, but yes, I care about you, more than I probably should. Ayanna moved closer to him on Elizabeth's old trunk. Among my people, we believe that some connections transcend time, that souls can recognize each other even when bodies are strangers. Do you think that's possible? A week ago, I would have said no. Tonight, he reached out to touch her face, tracing the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. Tonight, I think anything is possible. When she kissed him, it was with an intensity that spoke of longing held in check and hope carefully guarded. He kissed her back with equal fervor, his arms drawing her close as if she might disappear like smoke. Ayanna, he whispered against her lips. Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you has changed me, for the better. And meeting you has given me something I didn't know I was searching for. What's that? A home. Not a place, but a feeling. The feeling that I belong somewhere with someone. They held each other in the firelight, both understanding that tomorrow would bring danger and difficult choices. Morrison wouldn't give up easily, and there were still violent men camped nearby who wanted them dead. But tonight they had this, a moment of peace and connection in a world that seemed determined to tear good things apart. Jake, Ayanna said against his shoulder, there's something I need to tell you about the debt my family owes you. What about it? Traditional Apache life debts don't end with a single act of service. They create permanent bonds between families. By accepting my protection, you've made me part of your clan, and you've become part of mine. What does that mean? It means that even if this marriage started as legal necessity, it's become something more. a sacred bond that my people would recognize as true and lasting. Jake pulled back to look at her. And is that what you want, a true and lasting bond? With you, yes. Even though I'm the enemy, your people have fought for generations. You're not my enemy, she said firmly. You never were. You're the man who saved my grandfather's life when you could have let him die. You're the man who saved my life when you could have walked away. You're the man who's willing to fight for justice even when it puts your own safety at risk. And you're the woman who traveled 2 years to repay a debt of honor, who brought evidence to expose corruption, who's willing to trust a former scout with her life and her people's sacred places. They kissed again, slower this time with the weight of commitment and shared purpose. Whatever happens tomorrow, Jake said, we face it together. Together, she agreed. Outside, the wind howled across the Wyoming ridge, and dangerous men planned violence in the darkness. But inside the cabin, two people who had found each other across cultural divides and personal pain made promises that would either see them through to morning or carry them into whatever came next. The debt was paid, but the bond they'd created was just beginning. The attack came at dawn, just as Ayanna had predicted. Jake woke to the sound of splintering wood and immediately rolled from the bed, grabbing his rifle in the same motion. Ayanna was already moving her Apache training, making her a shadow in the gray pre-dawn light. Tommy, Jake called. Cellar now. The boy appeared from the back room, wide-eyed but moving fast. Are they here? Yes, remember what we practiced. Tommy nodded and disappeared through the trapdoor they'd prepared, pulling it closed behind him. The cellar connected to an old root storage tunnel that led outside, their insurance policy if the cabin became untenable. Morrison's men had split into two groups, Jake realized as he assessed the attack. 4 were coming through the front, 3 more approaching the back. Textbook flanking maneuver, but they'd underestimated their targets. The first man through the shattered front door met Ayanna's arrow in his chest. He dropped with a gurgling scream that brought momentary pause to his companions. Federal agents, Morrison's voice called from outside. You're surrounded. Surrender the woman and the stolen property. Jake put 2 rifle shots through the doorframe, forcing the attackers to take cover. Go to hell, Morrison. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm. Morrison's men would charge Jake and Ayanna would drive them back. Then everyone would reload and plan the next assault. But Jake knew they were fighting a losing battle. Morrison had more men and more ammunition. Eventually something would give. We need to break their confidence, Ayanna said during a brief lull, echoing her words from days before. Make them think this costs more than it's worth. Any ideas? Yes, but you won't like it. Before Jake could ask what she meant, Ayanna did something that stopped his heart. She stood up, clearly visible through the damaged doorway, and called out in a voice that carried across the ridge. Morrison, I have what you want, the map and the journal. Let's make a trade. Ayanna, no, Jake hissed, trying to pull her back into cover, but she resisted, keeping herself visible to the men outside. You can't get what you want by killing us. The evidence is hidden where you'll never find it if we die. Morrison's voice came back closer now. What kind of trade? Safe passage for the man and boy. You can have me and the evidence. No, Jake's voice carried clearly across the battlefield. We do this together or not at all. Morrison laughed, an ugly sound in the cold morning air. Touching, but I think I like the lady's offer better. Send out the evidence and yourself, and I'll consider letting the others live. Consider, Ayanna called back. That's the best offer you'll get. Jake saw what she was doing. Morrison wanted her to believe he'd honor a bargain, but everyone knew he intended to kill all of them regardless. She was buying time, but for what? The answer came in the form of rifle shots from an unexpected direction. Someone was firing on Morrison's men from the tree line to the east. Precision shots that dropped 2 attackers before they realized they were being flanked. Deputy Marshal Cole materialized from the snow-covered rocks, his federal badge clearly visible, along with 3 other men Jake didn't recognize. Federal marshals, Cole's voice cut through the chaos. Agent Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and murder. Morrison's response was immediate and desperate. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed one of his surviving men and pointed toward the cabin. Kill them all. Burn the evidence. What followed was the most intense 10 minutes of Jake's life. Morrison's remaining men, realizing they were trapped between the cabin's defenders and federal marshals, fought with desperate ferocity. Jake and Ayanna found themselves fighting for their lives while trying to avoid hitting the marshals closing in from outside. It was Tommy who ended it. The boy emerged from the tunnel behind Morrison's position, carrying the spare rifle Jake had given him for emergencies. Morrison was so focused on the battle in front of him that he never saw the threat from behind. Federal Agent Morrison. Tommy's young voice cracked with nerves but held steady. Drop your weapon. Morrison spun around, gun raised, and Jake felt his world narrow to a single terrifying moment. Morrison was going to kill the boy. Jake could see it in the agent's eyes, could see his finger tightening on the trigger. Jake's shot took Morrison's center mass, spinning him around and dropping him in the snow. The corrupt agent tried to raise his gun one more time, but Cole's bullet finished what Jake had started. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake realized he couldn't hear any more gunshots. Morrison's men were either dead or surrendering to federal marshals. Tommy, Jake called. You all right? Yes, sir, the boy called back, though his voice was shaky now that the danger had passed. Cole approached the cabin, his badge held high. Jake Brown, Ayanna Stormwind, you're safe now, it's over. Jake sank against the cabin wall, emotionally and physically drained. Ayanna moved to his side and he pulled her close, marveling that they were both still alive. How did you know to come? Ayanna asked Cole. Marshal Davis and I figured Morrison wouldn't wait for legal processes. We've been watching his camp since yesterday, waiting for him to make his move. When his men started moving before dawn, we knew it was time to act. Tommy emerged from his hiding place and ran to Jake and Ayanna, who wrapped him in a fierce embrace. Is it really over? The boy asked. Morrison's dead, Cole said. His men are either dead or in custody. And thanks to the evidence you provided, we have already arrested 3 other territorial officials who were part of his conspiracy. Jake looked at Elizabeth's journal, still clutched in Ayanna's hands. What happens to this now? It becomes evidence in a federal prosecution. Your sister's documentation will help us clean up corruption throughout the territory. She would have been proud of what you've accomplished here. Ayanna stepped forward. Deputy Marshal, what about the sacred map, my people's gold? Cole smiled. According to federal law, that map shows mineral deposits on traditional Apache lands. As such, those deposits belong to the Apache Nation, not the United States government. Morrison never had any legal claim to them. Or relief flooded through Ayanna's features. My grandfather's sacred trust is safe. More than safe, protected by federal law. As the federal marshals finished cleaning up Morrison's camp and preparing to transport the surviving attackers, Jake found himself alone with Ayanna and Tommy for the first time since the attack began. Well, he said finally, what do we do now? Now we live, Ayanna said simply. We build the life we've chosen together. All 3 of us, Tommy asked hopefully. All 3 of us, Jake confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. Family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from choice. And from sacred debts, Ayanna added with a smile. Speaking of debts, Jake said, yours is officially paid. You've more than repaid what your family owed. Ayanna moved closer to him. The debt of honor is paid, yes, but the bonds we've created are permanent. I'm not leaving unless you want me to. What I want, Jake said, pulling her close, is to spend the rest of my life learning what it means to be your husband. Your real husband. And I want to learn what it means to be part of your family, to help raise Tommy to build something good in this harsh place. Tommy grinned up at them. Does this mean I get to learn Apache traditions and mountain survival skills? It means you get to learn about both your heritages, Ayanna said. White and Apache, the best of both worlds. As evening fell over the Wyoming ridge, 3 people sat around their rebuilt fire, planning a future that none of them could have imagined a week ago. The debt had been paid, justice had been served, and a family had been forged in the crucible of shared danger and a growing love. Jake looked at his wife, his real wife, now chosen freely and bonded permanently, and at the boy who'd become his son through love rather than blood. Elizabeth would have been proud of what they'd built. Sarah's memory was honored. Morrison's corruption had been exposed. But more than that, 3 broken people had found each other and created something whole. What do we do tomorrow? Tommy asked as they prepared for bed. Tomorrow we start building our real life together, Jake said. We repair the cabin plan for spring and figure out what it means to be a family. And we honor those who came before us, Ayana added. My grandfather, your sister, Elizabeth, all the people who made it possible for us to find each other. Together, Tommy said, trying out the word that had become their family motto. Together, Jake and Ayana agreed. Outside, the Wyoming wind still howled across the mountains, but its voice had changed. Where once it had carried loneliness and regret, now it sang of possibility and hope. The former scout's redemption was complete. But more than that, it was just the beginning of something better than he'd ever dared dream possible. A family. A love that transcended cultural boundaries. A future built on the foundation of choosing to be better than the past. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest treasure of all.